that, but we need to welcome Elizabeth Stegemoller. She's a professor, neuroscientist, and music therapist at Iowa State University. So you offer dance, singing, boxing, and yoga to your Parkinson's patients. Please tell us why that is.
Well, I started with a singing study, and when we finished that initial study, everyone wanted to keep going. So we kept singing, and then members of the group were like, well, what about dance and exercise and music? And I was like, well, let's see what we could do. And so that came about. And then people started asking about boxing and yoga. And I happened to have two wonderful graduate students. One was a boxer and one was trained in yoga. And I said, well, let's go for it. So a lot of the classes really came from the community that we were working with and their interest in having more opportunities for exercise and engagement with music.
How many patients do you have who participate in these classes,
Well,
approximately?
yeah. So live, when we were meeting in person, we had about 30 people that would come some of them came to all four, some only to singing, some only to boxing, just kind of depended on what they wanted to do. And now with the virtual sessions, we have, I don't know quite the number, but we have quite a few more that have been able to join us more regularly now that we offer all of our outreach online.
See, we're not going back, are we, in that case, because telehealth has been so incredibly successful. David, you have the same experience, right? Just so many more people we can reach them.
Exactly
Yeah.
the same experience. It's just it's become a global class, which is wonderful.
That's extraordinary. So, Elizabeth, how has singing? I mean, I love that singing is helpful. That's music to my ears. So, how does it help swallowing?
Well, so in our first study, we looked at the muscle activity associated with swallow. So we put electrodes on the muscles that we use to swallow, and what we saw is the muscle activity was on longer. And so when you swallow, you want to make sure that the muscle activity is holding up the larynx long enough so that you don't have any foreign material to seep through. And so our results are kind of showing that muscle activity is engaged throughout the entire swallow, hopefully with a little bit of a protective component to it to keep foreign material from moving down.
I thought it was interesting. You also said that Parkinson's typically starts on one side of the body, and that can have an effect on swallowing.
Yeah. So after that first study and we saw the improvements with swallow and the improvements with the respiratory control, we kind of wanted to know what the underlying physiology was behind that. And so typically you have Parkinson's on one side, and as it progresses, it moves to both sides. But if you have, for swallow in particular, we would want both sides to work equally. And so we looked at the brain activity that was controlling the muscle groups with swallow, and it's just pilot data to start out, but it's kind of on that top graph. The two gray bars show that the participants who have been singing for at least a year, and they have more bilateral control over the muscle groups for swallow. And
So,
then with
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, the person who hadn't been singing does not.
So, how does music affect cortical activity? Because you're measuring brain activity with EEG, right? Are you using fMRI as well?
We use EEG and also transcranial magnetic stimulation.
Uh,
So we're trying to figure that out. It's a really good question. A lot of our studies are on hold right now. But one of our hypotheses is listening to preferred music or engaging with preferred music increases dopamine production, but it's in a different part of the brain than substantia nigra. It increases activation in the ventral tegmentum area. However, there are studies that show that there are the capability or there are connections of the ventral tegmentum area to motor cortical regions as well as frontal regions of the brain. And so perhaps that's kind of one of the theories that we're trying to work on and look at with our imaging techniques, that perhaps being engaged with music is increasing this dopamine production, which can also enter other regions of the brain, and maybe help improve movement, help improve emotions, obviously, and also even hopefully some cognitive learning and neuroplasticity.
So are the students who are helping you, what are their majors? Are they music therapists? Are they neuroscientists? What are they pursuing?
So I get the gamut. So we have music majors, we have kinesiology majors, which is my department that study movement. We have biology. Most of them are pre-med, pre-health professionals that are looking to go into being a doctor, a physical therapist, occupational therapist. We've had pre-speech therapists. And then, of course, my grad students are the gamut, anywhere from psychology, gerontology, neuroscience, and kinesiology. So I get a mixed bag.
Well, you've been so successful. I mean, when you see how enthusiastic, we're going to watch a couple of videos actually, because it's so, I love the enthusiasm. And so you were working with healthy adults as well. What were you finding, anything? What were you looking for?
Yeah, so the first part where we were looking at is just to try to understand how music was impacting the motor cortex, just by listening to music or doing just a simple finger tap. And so we are seeing changes in the motor cortex just by what style of music you listen to, and just engaging in music versus a tone alone is changing motor cortical activity, which is pretty interesting because you might think, I'm just listening to music. Why would it have anything to do with the part of my brain that controls movement? But it does change that in healthy young adults, and we're looking now at what's happening in people with Parkinson's disease in healthy older adults. So I think it's like we're born to move to music, we're born to sing to music, and it just because you have Parkinson's disease doesn't mean that you can't do that anymore.
Some of your patients are improving dramatically and some don't. Do you have any theories about why that is?
Yes, that's again the next study that we're trying to do. So we've had a couple of our participants, they improve just from 1 hour of singing by 12 points on their motor UPRS score. And so doing medication is like 4 points. So this was huge because all they're doing is singing. So we're actually not doing much movement. And so we're trying to figure out why that is, because then there's other participants that don't improve. We think that this might be related to the actual singing session, possibly, maybe whether or not they're actually engaged. Do they like the music? Did we do too many vocal exercises at the beginning? We're doing group singing. But we're also looking at the physiology underneath that to determine, is this related to changes in cortisol? Maybe they're less stressed. Is this related to changes in oxytocin, which is a measure of bonding? And we're actually looking at peripheral markers of inflammation as well to see if some of these things are changing, so that we have a better idea of kind of the underpinnings of why we see these dramatic changes. And then finally, we're actually doing interviews. We want to talk to the participants. We want to know, what is it about the sessions that work for you? What is it that doesn't work? And then being able to take that information and combine it with what we do in the lab is just extremely, extremely valuable.
Thank you. Well, we were talking a little bit before about the fact also that vis-a-vis singing, that COVID patients are sometimes left with less lung capacity than they would like to have, less than they had before, and couldn't we use singing in a digital manner to help people with vocal production, with actually being able to increase their lung capacity? So that's something we can talk about, but there's no question that are you a singer? Is your background, is your training as a singer?
No,
No.
but my husband is. So I am a music therapist, and I met my husband in grad school, and my very best friend is also a singer. And so I went to many voice lessons. And I remember sitting there and going, well, we could use this for therapy.
I see.
So,
Okay.
right.
Well, that's fabulous. Well, we have some questions from our viewers today. So starting with Chris from Chico, does the act of dancing or the movement help to rewire or repair the nerve cells in the brain? And how does this work if that's what is happening? And Elizabeth or Dr. Sheckman, please feel free to speak up.
I think it's a great question. I'm not sure anyone is able to answer that question, because in order to answer it, you'd have to have some way of visualizing the region of the brain that is suffering and those cells are dying, to see whether there was some measurable repair. And as I said, there's no,
Not yet.
there's no dye or stain that can be applied to a living person. The Lewy bodies that I mentioned can only be diagnosed in biopsy of brain tissue, and you can't take that until a person has died. So that's a challenge.
Rusalva wants to know, how do the effects of singing and dancing change for someone with Parkinson's when they're done in a group setting versus individually? Is there a benefit of synchrony and the shared experience? What do you think? Just from your experience, yeah.
That's a great question. I would say yes, there is great benefit in the social bonds that happen, that sense of belonging to a community, and the sense of entrainment that happens. Remember, you're not just watching the teacher leading a class, you're also watching all of the people around you moving in tune with the music and the rhythm simultaneously. And that's a very powerful experience. It also helps, we've heard people say anecdotally that it helps them set their own timing, which is something that can be challenging in Parkinson's. That said, we do have a number of people who are very comfortable dancing alone. They'll put on one of our videos and they'll dance by themselves. And on the Zoom experiences, which is how we're leading class now, it's sort of a hybrid of that. You do get the sense that you're in a room, but you also have that privacy. And I will say that for some individuals, that sense of a private experience is actually welcome. Some people with Parkinson's are not that comfortable being in a group. They don't necessarily want to be seen. They may not even be out about their Parkinson's. And so the online experience provides access to those who may wish to maintain some privacy. But I would say there is great benefit. We have probably been dancing and singing together in groups for tens of thousands of years, and so that's part of our wiring. And to go back to that experience in a targeted therapeutic way is certainly more beneficial. But you are definitely, I would say, you're definitely getting benefits in the personal experience as well. Elizabeth, would you agree in terms of singing? Or?
Most definitely in terms of singing. Although I always get the comment, well, I can't sing. And I'm like, well, I can't either, but we're going to do it together. So, and I think that's a big part of it. And when we do, I don't know, this may sound really bad, but when we do our virtual programs, everyone is on mute except for the leader because of the delay. So there is a little bit of singing by yourself in the virtual programs, but we can still see each other. And actually the benefits of interacting together and some of the underlying physiology may actually be really beneficial to the brain and to people with Parkinson's. And
question from Sandra, Dr. Stegemoller, do you think your research would work with stroke victims who are left with swallowing difficulties?
That is a great question. I would hope so. I would think, at this point, anything is better than nothing. So there's a lot of overlap between what they do in speech and language pathology with what we do in singing. And so I would say, sure, I would think it would be beneficial.
Wendy Sue is checked in. She is, yes, I know Wendy Sue. She's with Novartis. Dr. Stegemoller, have you looked at neurofilament light chain levels? Studies have shown that this is a biomarker associated with neuronal, is that a word? Yeah, damage, such as those seen in PD with the motor neurons. NFL can be assessed via simple blood draw, so not too invasive. Would be interesting not only to see dopamine levels during music therapy, but also neuronal markers.
Yeah, that is great. We have not looked at that at this point. We're hoping to be able to continue with our research and to be able to continue with our blood draws and looking at different markers within the peripheral system to see if we can find something. But that is really, really a great thought.
Dr. Sheckman, is this something that, are you thinking about these kinds of treatments? Or are you 100% focused, of course, on figuring out what the foundation of Parkinson's is?
Our effort is exclusively a basic science effort. It may be frustrating to hear that because we know science is so slow. We're seeing that now in the pandemic.
Right.
But with 200 years of experience with this disease and little, really little to show that really changes the ultimate fate, many of us feel that the answer has to come from a basic molecular and cellular understanding of the disease. Similar, I will say, to the breakthroughs that have made the most difference in heart disease and cancer. It has come from an understanding of the genetic and molecular basis of those diseases that we now have such success. And we need that now for Parkinson's. So all of the things that you've heard the other participants say are terribly important. And I know from personal experience that encouraging movement and cognitive engagement is important, just in giving someone the spirit that they need to carry on. But the disease is inexorable. And eventually one's energy is sapped, and in 30% of the cases, one's cognitive skills decline to the point of not being able to communicate. And there's nothing to reverse that.
Thank
so
you.
far.
Thank you. Well, listen, one of the things I learned right away is that this connecting science also with the practitioners who are dealing directly with the patients is a really important a kind of exercise. And it's true that one of the things I've seen, certainly with brain plasticity, is that sometimes, I mean, Ben Hu was going to tell us that his findings have shown that the progression of the disease can be slowed down with some of these therapies a little bit, but of course not ever stopped. So please continue your work. There are several more questions here, but I think I'm going to stop for today. I want to thank you all so very much for joining us. And, it's just been a joy to have you, Dr. Randy Scheckman, David Leventhal, and Drs. Elizabeth Stegemoller. For more information about Parkinson's disease, take a look at the American Parkinson Disease Association website. Links are posted in the event description on Facebook. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. So do sign up for the newsletter at my Facebook page or my website, reneefleming.com. I encourage you to review past episodes of Music of Mind Live on my Facebook page, Renee Fleming Music in the meantime. By the way, that was neuronal. I was reading that and thinking, what is that word? It's neuronal. So how often do you get to be present at the birth of a new recognized field of scientific inquiry? Next week, we'll do exactly that as we welcome 3 incredibly illustrious women to discuss the NeuroArts Blueprint. This initiative will articulate an emerging cross-disciplinary area of study at the intersection of science, health, and the arts. And joining us will be Susan Meg Salmon, founder and director of the International Arts and Mind Lab at the Brain Science Institute at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. And also joining us will be Ruth Katz, Vice President and Executive Director of the Health, Medicine, and Society Program at the Aspen Institute, and from the NIH, my colleague, and I'm thrilled that we have Dr. Emmeline Edwards. We're working together with the Kennedy Center, Director of Extramural Research for the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, and co-chair of the NIH Music and Health Working Group. It's going to be an exciting episode with important news from this field, so please join us on September 15th.